Welcome, my mages, to Sage of Fables. As you can see, I'm joined here this week by a dear friend, someone who I'm always happy to be able to jam games with on our Founders Discord, who I have here to talk about a super cool deck. Whimsy, tell us about yourself and the deck and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so I go by Whimsy. I primarily play over on the cEDH Reddit Discord, where I'm a GM over there. Do spell table games every Friday, and that's where I jam a lot of my games. I'm known around there in a lot of the communities as just kind of the residential blue-white player, one of the very few that are left. And specifically, the blue-white deck that has caught Sage's attention here is Reynar, the Ever Watchful. It's a new edition out from Call Time that I thought could do a lot of cool things. So I kind of built a shell around it and it performed decently well. I'm still, of course, going through and tuning like I think everybody is. But outside
Mm-hmm.
of that, the primary deck you'll see me playing most of the time is Grand Arbiter. I've been playing Grand Arbiter Augustin for like 10 years now, and I don't think I'll ever
Wow.
stop. And then I also play a lot of Dragon Lord Ojutai as kind of my backup. Rule of law style deck in blue white. But outside of that, we've just been working on nothing but blue white constantly for the past several years.
Definitely, when I started working on a Vega deck, you were definitely the foremost expert to consult.
Yeah, I'm one of the only crazy people who's still out there playing blue white. So I get a lot of questions about things like Vega constantly.
Oh man, I'm sure. Yeah, I played. I
Yeah.
think I played against your Ochitai deck once. Man, that thing just beats face like
Yep.
nobody's business.
Yeah, it hits you and it hits you again, and then it plays a rule of law, then it draws counterspells to protect the rule of law, then it keeps hitting you. Turns out Turbonos doesn't like that very much.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I recorded a video about Valky as my last video, and that was like number one, like deck weaknesses. Hey, we're Turbo Adnos, we're Storm.
Yeah.
We don't like Rule of Law. We don't like Ether Sworn Candidates. All of that could
Yeah.
just go on and get.
Yeah, there's a lot of the meta that falls to a lot of that, and that's kind of the niche that specifically this Reynar deck is trying to take over. So I think it's a very cool list.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And so, with that, let us look at Reynar. Where did I put you? There you are. So, Reynar is a legendary creature spirit warrior, a 2/3 for 2 blue and a white, with flying and vigilance. The first card you foretell on each of your turns costs 0 to foretell. And whenever you exile one or more cards from your hand and/or permanents from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So when you were looking at when you saw when Reynar got spoiled or whenever you first saw it, what was it like? What was kind of your thought process on like, ooh, how am I going to build a unique Azorius deck around this commander?
So the interesting things that kind of are going on for Reynar is he doesn't have a very good stat line and he doesn't have a very like nicely put in mana cost, right? He's 4 mana for a 2/3 with flying and vigilance. It's not super value. The vigilance is nice. And the first line of text doesn't really matter a whole lot. Foretell isn't the greatest thing, specifically in a cEDH environment, just because there's not a lot of foretell, right? Um,
For sure.
but the second line is really kind of what drew me into um, the interesting things that Reynar can do, because that's actually a very wonky line of rules text that I think a bunch of us discovered when were jamming games with it, right?
Yeah.
And we just had to think like, well, how do we exile things from our hand or from the battlefield? And one of the strongest effects that blue white has to it right now is rest in peace. And I love playing rest in peace. It is one of my favorite effects. And when you start kind of looking at the way the card is worded and the way that it handles interactions with rest in peace, it starts doing very um, broken things on a value side of the game. It starts turning everyone's fetch lands into a spirit for you. It turns people's treasures into spirits for you. Um, and white actually has more than one rest in peace effect. So I began seeing that we had a lot of redundancy in that effect. And then if we could find a way to consistently exile things from the battlefield under a rest in peace effect, we had ways to go infinite very, very easily. So that second line of text is really what drew me to the command, because every time you can get rid of a spirit, it would replace itself if it is under a rest in peace effect.
Yeah, oh my god, that absolutely just blew my mind.
Yeah,
I remember sitting there like, there's no way this could be how it works, and
yeah.
sure enough.
I have been rules checked so many times playing this deck. Um,
God, yeah, I can imagine.
and the more I actually began playing this deck, the more that the first line of text kind of became relevant. Because the big thing when you're playing rule of law based decks
Hmm.
is the deck wants to find ways to break parity on your rule of law effect, right? I've had a couple interesting like Bant ideas where you play like Alchemist Refuge to play on multiple turns to like work under
Okay.
rule of law, but specifically being able to foretell a card and still play your spell ends up being
Mm,
a very powerful effect because under rule of law, the way that you win under rule of law is whoever is spending the most mana efficiently and effectively wins the game. That's why like Kenrith rule of law is like the premier rule of law deck in the format because it has so many ways to utilize his mana with all of his abilities under rule of law that he can just break parity harder than anybody else and eventually win the game.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially when you can just like, depending on the flavor of Kenrith, of like doing a Dockside Mayhem Devil, just reanimation thing is incredibly silly and powerful.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
turns out that doesn't take any spells to do that, right? You just reanimate it from your graveyard. You're just doing it all on abilities. So the first line of text on Reynar becomes a lot more impactful if you have foretell cards and you're in a rule of law, because you can
Mm-hmm.
establish things like your Saw It Coming, like your Mystic Reflection, and then still play another spell and get value that way.
Indeed. And so for everyone, Rule of Law is an enchantment for 2 and a white. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. It's a real hard nope in this meta right now where everyone's trying to like chain cantrips together to power out an Adnaz, where Storm has gotten really popular again. And yeah, so being able to be like, no, 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 play fair, please.
Yeah, it definitely slows down the game a lot, and a bunch of the power becomes when you start including blue with rule of law because if somebody tries to remove the rule of law, the counterspell just hard stops it even further. So
Yes,
yeah,
indeed. And then with all of our rest in peace effects, so rest in peace, of course, 1 and a white for an enchantment. As it enter or when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all graveyards, and if a card or token would be put there, would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile instead. And with the sort of duplicate effect of that in a creature of Samurai of the Pale Curtain, which that was a creature I was like, I'm
yeah,
sorry that exists.
yeah. It's very obscure. A bunch of us Heliod players know that creature very well, so we're busting into some other existing decks to pull that creature out.
Yeah.
It's very powerful as well.
And notably, it has Bushido, so if
Yep,
it blocks or becomes blocked, it can kill a Timna, which is hilarious.
yep. Just extra value.
So good, so good. And so, with that, so how is the deck looking exactly to close out the game using Rest in Peace and Reynar?
Yeah, so the combo was mentioned a little earlier. We use Rest in Peace, or alternatively, we can use Samurai of the Pale Curtain. We actually do have a third effect in the card Cosmic Intervention, which is actually a foretell card. It is a one-sided Rest in Peace for ourselves that can be
Oh yeah,
activated at
that's right.
instant speed. Um, so that card's very powerful with Reynar for a different reason. Of you can play Reynar, play that on the same turn, and then actually try to combo out over the top of other people because it's instant speed. And we use any of these three effects comboed with either our Altar of Dementia or a blasting station. And basically, what happens is ideally we do it with the Altar of Dementia, but when we have the Rest in Peace effect, and if we have a spirit token in play or just any other creature, right, we can do this. We can actually sack our own rule of law to use interaction to prevent this from happening. If people wanted to like
Ooh.
interact with us, is we sack the creature, the Rest in Peace puts it into exile as a replacement effect, Reynar triggers, you get another spirit. And then somebody would mill their library for 2. And then you just sack the spirit, it gets replaced again, and you can present this as a loop. And then eventually you can just deck out everybody. It's very similar to the common blue white win condition that people like to use with Rest in Peace Helm of Obedience, except you don't have to kill people one at a time. You can kill everybody in the same turn. Um, so that's
Yeah,
very
definitely.
powerful. Blasting Station does it the same way. It's just a little less ideal because it is a 3 mana outlet and the spirit actually has to enter and then the Blasting Station trigger on tap. So there's more places people can interact with it, but it effectively does the same thing. The Reynar spirit enters play, it untaps the Blasting Station, you tap the Blasting Station, sack it, it goes to exile, you get another spirit, and so on. So that's how we're looking to close out the game. We have a lot of tutors and ways to get there through cards like Word of Invention, which let us win at instant speed if we have like Cosmic Intervention set up. Um, and we just run all the good blue-white tutors, even
Oh
though there's not
wow,
very many.
that's
So
really cool with with cosmic intervention and then being being able to like intuition
yeah,
for
yeah,
that's sweet.
it's a very like fringe thing that comes up, but it definitely allows you to win over the top of other people. And being able to win at instant speed under rule of law is also just like very very important because you can get into very grindy games where if you try to jam a win through your rule of law effect, you will just get stopped because people are starting to hold counter spells. But then you can
Yeah.
really sneak wins on other people's turns by like foretelling your cosmic intervention, waiting for some people to cast spells, and then you just whir of invention over the top. You get your alter in play, and then on the next person's turn, if somebody takes an action, you can just cast your cosmic intervention, and then you're winning.
Are you running that land that allows you to sacrifice it to play cards at instant speed? What was that card called?
Emergent zone.
Emergent
We
Zone.
are not running emergent zone purely for the fact that our deck already has 28 instants, so we're already playing
Mm,
mostly at instant speed.
fair.
Usually on our turn, we are going to be developing like more mana rocks, um, maybe a Setsei's Divining Top, cards like that to gain some
Mm-hmm.
additional value. Maybe develop another rule of law to overlay that effect twice to make sure that nobody's getting out of that anytime soon, and then we're just mostly going to be trying to win at instant speed or just make sure everyone's out of cards that way and trying to win out through just attrition.
Nice. And then, so Alter Dementia, artifact for 2 mana. Sacrifice a creature target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. So, of course, with the replacement effect, get a spirit instead. And then with
Yep.
Blasting Station for 3 mana, tap, sacrifice a creature. Blasting Station deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And whenever a creature comes into play, you may untap Blasting Station. So, yeah, I love
Yeah.
I love being able to see free sack outlets in cEDH. It's not something you see very often, but it is definitely becoming more popular.
Yeah, and real quick, just because I know a lot of people end up actually asking me this question about the deck is why don't we play specifically like Phyrexian Altar, right, or like
Mm-hmm.
those cards, because they do generate infinite mana with Reynar, right, but we don't have an outlet in the command zone like some of the other decks,
Right.
so generating infinite mana is good, but it doesn't actually do anything for us. So that's just why we don't kind of run those effects. We really want the impactful sacrifice do something effects. So
Mm-hmm.
that's just why we're not on those specifically.
Yeah. Oh, I love Blast Fixation.
Yeah,
Such a
it's a
good
very
place
fun
for it.
card.
And so, being in like sort of this like control shell, like what are some of the things that you're looking like value engines or other stacksy things that you're looking to leverage to slow your opponents down, and all that to make sure that you can be able to protect your rest in peace and close the game.
Yeah, so a lot of the things we're looking for come specifically in how do we accrue additional value because getting a value engine online in blue white is very very important. So we of course have Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study are the big two. And if we can establish one of those, we're very happy. We can often keep hands with cards like Behold the Multiverse, which is the 4 mana draw spell from Kaldheim that draws cards, has foretell. It lets you, I believe, scry 2 and then draw 2. That's a good way to just really gas out with Reynar because it's free and then it costs 2 mana.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Outside of that, we're sometimes looking to just tutor for an intuition. If we can grab an intuition, then we can just set up an intuition pile with Savines to get our Rhystic Study, or if we draw into our Rhystic Study before we want to do that, we can then use the intuition to transition into a win. It's a very powerful card. And then the third thing that we're sometimes looking to do is the deck runs Sensei's Dividing Top and Counterbalance. Um, Counterbalance for me is one of the most important ways to just ruin people under rule of law because you can set up the top of your library and while casting spells you can end up actually casting spells and still countering reaction responses to it, which is just very very good. So if we can establish some sort of Sensei's Divining Top counterbalance lock, it ends up being very very efficient for us.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a nice way to basically get free counter magic without
Yeah.
having to cast anything.
Yeah. So the big thing about playing control in Commander, right, is it's very hard because you lose card advantage every time you counter something.
Mm-hmm.
So just having a counterbalance in play lets you extend your hand a lot. I kind of describe it a lot as like indirect card advantage because everything you counter with counterbalance, you keep a card in your hand, right? You don't have to counter with something in your hand. So you're just gaining value that way. It's kind of a quasi value engine in that sense. That might be a bit of a hot take for some people, but that's definitely how I kind of approach that card. And a lot of our value engines also come from setting up just our foretell cards, gaining spirits with Reynar, because with Rest in Peace in play, nobody can attack us if we have Rest in Peace and Reynar in play, right? Because the thing that happens is like a Crom will swing at you, you block with your spirit dies, replacement effect, exile, you get your spirit back. It just becomes pointless to attack you.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's very very silly
Oh
to
man.
say the least.
Yeah, it's wow. And just yeah, against Crom, against, Timna Crom, against Najila, for every warrior that comes in and swings at you. Like, if you have a couple, like, you're just always going to have blockers for Najila, basically, and for
Yep.
the little warriors that it spawns. And they're going to trade with the spirits, which is just. And then once their warriors die, then you get more spirits, so you can actually sort of, like, outpace them.
Kind of, sorta. The Reynar text does say whenever you get one or more cards. So
Oh,
So
okay.
because all the combat happens at the same time, then you only get one
Right.
spirit, and you're kind of sad.
That is sad.
Um, but even if the Najila is swinging at other players, right, and they're blocking the warriors, you then
True.
get spirits for it. So like you're just accruing a lot of value off of people, right? It turns all your fetches into a 1/1. It turns all of the treasures people generate into 1/1s. It's just every time something dies on the battlefield, your rest in peace is what's causing the thing to go to exile, so you get a spirit for it. It's pretty not okay. It gets out of control very very quickly.
Yeah, it's yeah, what a interesting and sort of kind of like niche interaction that you get to take
Yeah,
advantage of. That's also like such a good hate piece because with all of the underworld breaches running around and everything, just to be able to combo off such a strong stacks piece is chef's kiss.
that is definitely kind of the niche that the deck is trying to occupy, right? Is it gets to run all of the most powerful stacks pieces in rule of law. It plays okay in the rule of law. I'm not gonna say it plays like the best because it doesn't, but specifically just being able to leverage Rest in Peace as one of the most powerful stacks pieces in the format and also be a win condition for you, it's just very, very strong. There's a lot of decks that can't win under Rest in Peace, right? Like
Yeah,
Corvold gets hard stopped. Um, all of the breach decks get hard stopped. Things like Razakats get like dead stopped. Just a lot of Nos decks in general get hard stopped because they're looking to transition into breach lines.
yeah,
So
for
so
sure.
so it's just very very powerful stuff because people will often tutor for some sort of breach line early, and then if you just slam the rest of these, all of their early game tutors have gone to waste. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
not being even able to recur those back for value to try and like manually go
yeah,
off another way. Just oof,
hmm yeah.
powerful.
The fact that it also just clears the graveyard is just extra value on top.
But yeah, and so with that, we'll go to your sort of like notable inclusions that you have. So there is like the foretell package. So we have, as you mentioned earlier, behold the multiverse instant for 3 in a blue, scry 2, then draw 2 cards, and you can foretell it for 1 in a blue. We
Yep.
have saw it coming, counter target spell, which so it's basically a cancel, but if you foretell it, you can play it for 1 in a blue. And I love this card, Starnheim Unleashed.
Yeah.
It's oh my god, just being able to just poop out a bunch of angels. So its foretell is XX white, and then you create a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance, and if it was foretold, you get X instead. And then we have Depart the Realms, which is basically like an unsummon, return
Yeah.
target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and you can foretell it for blue as an instant. My favorite one, Mystic Reflection, which I think pretty much if you're playing counter magic in blue, everyone should be running this card because it is ridiculous. Uh,
Yeah, I like Mystic Reflection a lot just because it's let me replace Hushbringer in a lot of my lists, and then it lets us play
mm,
more things like Spellseeker, more things like Gilded Drake and stuff like that, specifically in blue white. So
Yeah.
Mystic Reflection, super good card. People should definitely be running it.
She definitely. Oh my god, with all these docksides running around. So it's instant. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time one or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield, this turn they enter as copies of that chosen creature instead, and you can foretell it for a blue. Just like it's so good, like proactively or defensively. Just being able to like, hey, you know that dockside you were gonna get. It's an arbor elf instead,
Yeah.
or it's a spirit.
I actually had a very niche use with Mystic Reflection last night. Of I was using it um, to target a phantasmal image with no thing entering the battlefield. It was very
Oh,
very weird. The card has a lot of flexible uses. It's very very bizarre.
yeah.
It's a wonky
It's
card.
it's cool being like casting your commander. You're like, nope, get wrecked.
Yeah, yeah. That's an added benefit because Crom under rule of law is a very big problem. So just make sure they don't get a Crom.
Yeah,
It's simple as that.
I love that card. So yeah, all of the so yeah, you had kind of touched on it earlier about how the first line of Reynar's text being more has gradually become more important because you can for one foretell it for 0 and then being able to put something down that you can play later. But yeah, I guess why these ones in particular, or over other foretell cards, or
Yeah, so as far as Sot coming, Depart the Realm, Mystic Reflection, those are all just pieces of interaction. And Sot coming is just another counterspell, so I think we take it because it ends up being a 2-mana counterspell after we foretell it, which is pretty reasonable. It's not uncommon to just go like turn 1 Rule of Law, turn 2 Reynar, foretell something for a spirit, and then you're in a pretty good place.
mm-hmm.
Um, Depart the Realm, just a really good bounce spell to remove problematic Nagilas, problematic Derevis in that deck. If a Crom decides to start whacking you, you can just bounce the Crom. Mystic Reflection, we've covered why that's a good card. And then Behold the Multiverse is just a very efficient way to draw cards. If you foretell it for 0 and then you get a scry 2, draw 2 for 2 mana, that's pretty value. So I think we take it.
Yeah.
That's digging four deep potentially. And Starnheim Unleashed is probably the weirdest one in here because it's actually kind of our plan C for the deck. If things get really
Mm-hmm.
grindy, really wonky, I really wanted another foretell effect in the deck. So all of the other ones aren't really as great because we have things like Glorious Protector, which just like exile everything, then Glorious Protector leaves, everything comes back. We don't run many creatures, so it's not very good. Um,
Right.
but Starnheim Unleashed lets us create just a critical mass of angels. They all have flying, they all have vigilance, and they're 4/4s. So if somebody wants to trade their Crom for my Angel, I am oddly okay with this because they spent 5 mana on their Crom. I just have Angel tokens. Um, so I'm okay with that. It gives us a very late game mana dump that can sometimes be protected under counterbalance and things like that if we've gone that route. So that's why it's in there, is just kind of in case we lost a rest in peace effect along the way, or in case we lost our altar, we got stopped, and we just rip it off the top. We can foretell it. Next turn, we just make as many angels as we can under mana, and then we can start swinging out and try to close the game that way. That's why it's primarily, and there's kind of a backup win condition and then just an additional density of foretell mechanic for Reynar.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I love winning through beats.
Yep,
Zorius
it's
beats.
not common, but it definitely does happen.
Oh, for sure. Well, oh, man, yeah. Once it gets into the real late game and you're all just like slugging each other.
Yep. And
And then
ideally with the deck, every game is a late game play because we're
yeah,
playing rule law.
that's true. That's true. And then we also have Word of Invention, a triple blue and X and it has improvise, so you may search your library for an artifact card with CMC X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. The number of times I've had to tell people, yes, it goes onto the battlefield. I
Yep.
promise.
Yeah. It's a very, very, very strong card.
Oh man, definitely in modern. One of my friends has a blue-black like control deck that's looking to win through like the Sword of the Meek and doing that combo, and the
Yeah.
number of times just like, God damn it.
Yes, it's a very strong card. A lot of people don't realize it goes straight to the battlefield. The triple blue can be sometimes restrictive, but if you're winning and got the triple blue, then you're winning, right? So it's fine.
Yeah, and definitely being at instant speed and yeah, just being able to win on top of someone else with the cosmic intervention is
Yeah.
definitely very spicy play.
Specifically, the deck does include this. It could be reasonable to not include this, but since we're a rule of law deck, just being able to do things at instant speed and progress our game plan at instant speed become so valuable. So that's why this card ends up making the cut over something like reshape or like a fabricate or
Fabricate,
something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, well, definitely sort of a pet card for me.
Yeah.
And then exclusions. So we have skull clamp, artifact equipment. A creature gets +1/-1, and whenever the equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards and equip one. Whimsy! All of your spirits are 1/1s. Why aren't you playing this card?
Yeah, so Skull Clamp was a very early inclusion in the deck, because I actually did work on this deck with somebody else, and we kind of found that we wanted to establish a rest in peace effect so often
Mm-hmm.
that the rest in peace effect actually turns off the Skull Clamp, which isn't ideal. It does draw you some cards, but the big thing is we're not actually gaining as many spirits with Reynar without the rest in peace, right? We're gaining them off the foretell effects, we're gaining them off of imprint, and I believe we have like one or two other effects that like actually do gain us spirits out of hand. Um,
Ooh, imprint is spicy. I didn't even think about that.
yeah. So we're not really gaining that many spirits without the rest in peace effect anyway, and we want the rest in peace effect as often as possible. So just with that being said, turning off the skull clamp, it wasn't actually a value engine as often as we wanted, so it didn't end up making the cut.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, definitely a super non-bow. And then
Yeah,
two cards that I was really surprised not to see in the deck. One of them being Windfall, which we've kind of talked about, but
yeah.
Windfall being the sorcery for 2 and a blue. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards that a player discarded this way. And Time Twister for also for 2 and a blue, and each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. So, yeah, why not? I mean, being such
Yeah.
powerful and efficient card draw spells, why did these
So
make the cut?
so the big thing, and this is a bit of a controversial take in the blue white community. There's a bunch of us that don't play them. There's a bunch of us that do play them, and we go back and forth with each other all the time about how the other side is wrong. Um, so specifically, wheels and decks that want to play controlling as like a style, um, specifically like low color decks, right? If
Mm-hmm.
if if you're like a 4 color deck that has access to creature tutors and like just all the tutors you could ever want, like you are going to play wheels. Um, but in the low color decks, we often don't have ways to tutor for like Hole Breacher, right? Is it's
Mm,
very, very hard for us to tutor for Hole Breacher. So the
yeah.
reality of hitting Breacher plus Wheel just isn't going to happen. Um, if it does happen, it's good, right? But it's so hard to make happen. And wheels kind of lose value for you the longer you play the game. The wheels are very good on turn 1, turn 2. It definitely widens the amount of keepable hands you can take, where you're just like, I have nothing but mana and wheels. I play all my mana, I wheel, and then it disrupts everyone else. But outside of that, you start losing a lot of value on your wheels. And it's just very dangerous depending on the turn order, to be wheeling other decks, like faster
Mm,
decks than you, and
yeah.
giving them full new 7 cards, right? You're giving potentially 2 or 3 other turbo decks 7 new cards. You only have 7, and you can only stop so many people. So, like, if you're refilling everyone's hand after they've dumped all their mana, they're just going to bounce spell your rule of law and proceed to combo off. Um,
Yeah.
so that's where it's a little risky. Um, if we had better ways to tutor for Hull Breacher, it might be worth including. And the thing I say constantly is I don't have to wheel. The turbo decks are going to be want to wheeling anyway. So I might as well let them wheel for me. And then I can usually catch people with a Hull Breacher on their own wheel if I'm going to do that. Because all
Mm,
of the other
mm-hmm.
decks are playing wheels. So I can free up these slots for more interaction and just let the decks that want to wheel, because I'm not a turbo deck. I would like to refill my hand, but the risk is far too risky versus what you're gaining off of the 7 cards. So that's why we're not on wheels. It's definitely a back and forth constantly between people, but I personally think it's correct.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Yeah, especially when you're looking, it's definitely much harder to control the table if they
Yeah.
have more things to do, which means you have more things to answer.
It's also very susceptible to turn order, right? Because if you're going third and you have
Hmm.
two turbo decks going before you, right? They've dumped their hand. You're not just going to go mana crypt land wheel,
Yeah. Oh God, no.
right? right. So then you just have dead cards in your hand that could have been more interaction, more like card draw, more spells like that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So with that, what do you feel like are the overall like the deck's strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah. So the deck strengths, I think we've touched on a little bit. So you just gain natural tempo under your rule of law with like Reynar. He is a flyer, so he does get in for more beats than you kind of realize over the course of a game. But also just being able to foretell things under rule of law is a nice like minor interaction you can get. Um, and the big question is I talk about Crom a lot for somebody who really despises Crom, right? But I despise Crom purely for the reason that he hits me in the face a lot when I'm trying to play rule of law.
Yeah.
And when building rule of law decks, you have to find a way to deal with Crom, deal with like Kenrith, deal with these big beaters. Um, and specifically Reynar with the rest of piece in play. We discussed earlier how you block, the spirit goes to exile, you get a spirit back, right? So you can just indefinitely wall Crom with your spirits. The Dragonlord Ojutai deck is a very good example of this that you mentioned earlier. Is that deck exists because Ojutai is a 5/4, Crom's a 4/4. If you get any buff on Ojutai, you're just like immune to Crom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of your inevitability under rule of law against Crom. That's why decks like Grand Arbiter and decks like Vega and stuff like that struggle against Crom, because if you're under rule of law and you're not ending the game, Crom's just going to hit you in the face 5 times and then you're going to die, or
Yeah,
six
or a
times, I
big old
guess.
Corvold is gonna hit you in
Yeah.
the face.
So that's our inevitability there, which is very very strong. I think if the interaction didn't work that way and you couldn't indefinitely wall Crom, this deck would not fundamentally work. And then we mentioned earlier too that this deck just leverages the strongest win conditions or the strongest stax pieces as its win conditions, right? There's there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a good amount of layering there. Just having Rest in Peace, having Samurai the Pale Curtain just puts in work against so many decks. And if those are in play, you are halfway to your win condition, right? You only need one more card.
Which is not impossible to tutor up, especially
No.
with mystical tutor and enlightened tutor and
Yeah, it
everything.
turns out the only thing that blue white can actually like reasonably tutor for is artifacts. So
Yeah, right, definitely.
so there we go. Because even if we go like merchant scroll into like Whir of Invention into alternate dimension, right, we're getting there. So that's specifically why it's strong. Is you're getting to leverage all of the strongest stacks of pieces as your condition. It's just very very nice.
And then what do you feel like are some of the deck's sort of shortcomings or things that you
The
have to be really aware of while you're playing it?
Yeah, so oftentimes, depending on the bod, you're going to have to protect your rule of law with like as basically as if your life depends on it, because in most of the pods it does. If the rule of law goes away, the game's probably coming undone very quickly. Um, I think the biggest weakness of the deck is you don't really have a strong commander, right? Like Reynar
Mm-hmm.
independently is not very strong in the zone. The deck isn't often just going to go like fast mana, Reynar, foretell and card, right? Like, because that's not a very strong play inherently. It can be if you're going like first in turn order. If you just want to play like a Jewel Lotus, a land, play your Reynar, foretell like a Behold the Multiverse, right? Like you're putting yourself pretty far ahead there. You get a spirit, you're gonna dig 4 deep next turn, maybe play a Rule of Law, something like that, and you're very far ahead of the curve. Um, but your commander's not inherently powerful on his own. So you don't have the inevitability out of the command zone in that way. You really need to find your other pieces. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and all of your card advantage comes from your Mystic Study, your Mystic Remora, your Behold the Multiverse, um, through all of your like one mana cantrips and stuff to just put you deeper into your deck. So you really need to be hitting those, or you're just going to start losing out on card advantage to some of the other decks that have better tutors, usually have more card advantage directly in the command zone, like Timna and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately, just being in blue white leaves us very low on our card options. So just having lower colors makes the deck kind of inherently weaker, as opposed to like adding like black and red, getting some better tutors, getting breach and stuff like that. So that's just stuff you have to be
Yeah.
aware of. Um, if you like pretty much every card in your deck to be gas, then this probably isn't the deck for you. But if you want to just draw cards, sit there, hold up counter magic, counterspell things, and block Crom forever, then I definitely recommend the list for what it's worth.
Yeah, I definitely would like to proxy it up and try it out because it's been a hot minute since I've played like
Yeah.
any sort of control deck. Um, but yeah, with that, let's look at some. Oops, hata. There we go. Hands and stuff that to talk about like. Would you keep it? Would you ship it?
Yeah.
And like sort of what your first couple of like turns would look like. So for
Mm-hmm.
our first seven that we've got here, we have Chrome Mox, a Sea of Clouds, a Deafening Silence, a Talisman of Progress, Counterspell, a Snow-Covered Island, and a Rule of Law.
Yeah, so that hand, I heard Chrome Mox, Sea of Clouds, and the Deafening Silence just makes that an instant snap keep, right? So a lot of our mulligans are just going to be fast mana, Rule of Law, and then into Reynar, into like Grind Engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that hand has 2 Rule of Laws in it, so we're realistically going to be getting a couple more draws if we just play the land, play the Chrome Mox, even just like imprint or the Rule of Law, it's fine. And just play like the Deafening Silence. And then we're going to have a counterspell on the next turn. It's going to stifle a lot of other players' development in the early turns. And we're going to gain a bunch of draws to really try to gain more gas, gain more counter magic to protect our Deafening Silence, or just start drawing tutors to kind of progress towards our win con. It wouldn't be uncommon there to maybe cast a Reynar, just start hitting people, trying to find a foretell card and just gain a spirit and then just kind of chip away at some life totals while we're trying to gain some additional value.
Yeah, definitely. Would you? So when you have like a Deafening Silence and a Rule of Law in hand, do you sandbag one or do you play out both with the expectation that like one's got to get bounced or removed or something?
So usually layering your rule of laws is probably correct because it makes it a lot harder for them to interact with. Um, if you have the option to double up on rule of laws like very safely, you
Mm-hmm.
should. Just because a lot of the times you can find yourself without counter magic in hand randomly. And then if
Mm-hmm.
somebody just tries to bounce it and combo off, then it's just a very bad place to be. And usually other players aren't going to protect your rule of law, even though sometimes they maybe should.
Yeah,
Because
for
if
sure.
somebody is going to be bouncing the rule of law, they're like, oh, that's good for me, but they don't really realize that if somebody's bouncing that rule of law, they might be trying to win. Um,
Yeah.
but if you can double up on the rule of laws, I usually advise that you do so. It's just very very strong effect to layer because if they bounce one, they obviously can't bounce the other anymore, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah,
All right, let's look at another fresh seven. So Vin's Reclamation, Azorius. Ooh, this has no lands. We're just gonna ship this. This is a
yeah,
bad
no,
time.
we definitely get rid of those.
All right, second seven. Ooh, okay. So we have Snow Covered Island, a Gemstone Caverns, Intuition, Deafening Silence, Mystic Remora, Force of Will, Mana Crypt. Damn, this hand is
Yeah,
gas.
that hand is very very good. We definitely keep that. It has a turn one rule of law. We obviously dump all of our fast mana before we play the Deafening Silence, and then we can transition into a very, very clean intuition. Our intuition piles in the deck end up actually being just like Altar of Dementia, like Samurai of the Pale Curtain, Sabine's
Mm-hmm.
Reclamation. It costs you like eight mana or something to get there, but you definitely do get there eventually. So that hand is a snap keep because it has the rule of law, it has the tutors. You're going to be playing an early Reynar. You are just getting there in every capacity by like turn 3, turn 4. So
Yeah.
it's
So
very good.
what do you think you would in this hand? So you have with the Gemstone Caverns. What do you pitch to the Gemstone Caverns? Because you have the Snow Covered Island. You have the Intuition, Deafening Silence, Mystic Remora, Force of Will, and Mana Crypt. Or do you just play it as a regular land? Well, I mean, I can't imagine you would do that, but
Um, I could honestly see it might be a little greedy, but we can actually probably pitch the Force of Will there because we want to keep the Remora because we're probably going to be playing that Remora early because we can go
yeah.
land, Deafening Silence, Remora, and Mana Crypt are all going to be coming down on turn 1, right?
Oh my god! If I saw that on turn one, I would
Yeah.
be so sad.
And we really want to keep the intuition, so that Force of Will is going to have no target in our hand. So it seems a
Sure.
little weird and it seems very like unintuitive, but you can definitely just pitch that Force of Will. It depends a lot upon what your top deck is. If you draw like another blue card, then
Mm,
obviously keeping the Force will probably would have been okay. But like just the fact of having Remora, having Deafening Silence is just very, very strong. You have the mana crypt, you have 2 lands, you're playing Reynar, right? You're just in a very, very happy place. And you're
yeah,
gonna
for
be
sure.
paying for that Mystic Remora for a turn or two. So you're going to be getting a lot of cards out there more. It has the Rule of Law, it has the Grind Engine, it has Reynar, and it has a way to get an Intuition Follow in the game. That hand is very gas. I like it a lot.
Yeah. Ooh, that's oh man. All right. So with a fresh 7, uh, oh, it like barely changed at all. Oh, this is a lot more lands. So Snow Covered Island, Gemstone Caverns, Samurai of the Pale Curtain, a Mystic Gate, Exotic Orchard, Intuition, and Counterspell. So we've got like 4 lands, a Rest in Peace, an Intuition, and a Counterspell.
Yeah, so I think this hand is borderline keepable just because it has a Samurai of the Pale Curtain, and a Samurai of the Pale Curtain is going to be coming down on turn 1.
Yeah.
We don't have any fast mana in that hand aside from like the Gemstone Caverns, which puts us ahead by like a turn. If we're going first, this hand is obviously just completely not keepable, right?
Yeah.
If we're going second, third, or fourth, it's fine. This hand could potentially be mulligan depending on the other decks at the other decks at the table. I like it a lot just for like if we're playing against decks that really want to hit breach.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely just keep it because the turn 1 Samurai is very, very strong, and then we're going to be turn 2 intuitioning for either value or to progress towards a win. I would be more inclined to use that intuition as like a value intuition to set up like a Heuristic Study or something because we're
Mm-hmm.
still another turn off of establishing our Reynar. We can always go like Heuristic Study, Savines, and then like the Altar of Dementia can be the third card in that pile. So then we can establish the Heuristic Study and then later flash back for the
For
altar
the yeah.
when we want it. So that hand sounds pretty okay. It's very table dependent. The lack of an early Rule of Law kind of feels a little bad, but it should be okay if you know people are aggressively playing for breach.
Yeah. All right. Let's do one more. All right. So we have Ancient Tomb, Snow Covered Island, Dovin's Veto, Saw It Coming, Arcane Laboratory. Oh wow, I haven't seen that card in forever.
Yeah.
Gitaxian Probe and Cosmic Intervention. So
Um.
2 lands, no fast mana.
So Ancient Tomb does allow us a turn to Rule of Law. If we're going first, this hand is probably definitely a keep because we can just play like the island out, and then most people aren't usually going to be winning on turn 1. So turn 2, we'll just play the Ancient Tomb, play the Arcane Lab, and
Mm-hmm.
then that'll probably stick around because people are probably still developing. Because if people have to devote a bounce spell on turn 2, they're probably not going to be winning on turn 2 as well. We don't actually fuel a dockside here, which is kind of important. If they bounce the Rule of Law, then they're getting no treasures from us. And then we realistically have a turn 3 Reynar plus Imprint and Cosmic Intervention, and then we are 1 tutor away from just ending the game. Potentially at instant speed. If we draw War of Invention, we're just winning on somebody else's turn. That's probably keepable. It has a couple pieces of counterspell magic as well, so
Yeah.
that's very good. I think the Saw It Coming and the Cosmic Intervention, you're going to get 2 spirits off of Reynar with it. And the benefit when you have multiple foretell cards in play is people don't really know what they are. So then people start playing around things that might not be there, right? Is nobody's going to be casting their commander into what might be a Mystic Reflection, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
This is a very interesting line of play I come across in my Grand Arbiter games, where Mystic Reflection is the only foretell card in the deck. And sometimes I will foretell it, and it will just sit there as like a quasi stax piece because nobody wants to cast spells into it, right? So if I know somebody is looking to wheel or something, I will just foretell it. I will let it sit there, and I will dare people to cast their commander into it, and nobody will. So it buys you a lot of turns in that way. It's a very interesting way to use the card, but it definitely does happen that way more frequently than you would think.
Yeah, that is super interesting to be like, come on.
Yeah.
Eventually someone's gonna have to lean into it eventually, and you just
Yep.
gotta hope it's not you.
Yeah. It's a very funny card. I like the concept of foretell a lot. It definitely puts a lot of people in very weird scenarios.
Yeah, I love foretell. I really hope that they come out with more foretell cards because I think it's such an interesting use of the exile space to be able to to be able to just
Yeah,
make really interesting plays.
yeah. I'm definitely a big fan of it. I hope there's more support because the more support we get for it, I think the better Reynar gets. So that'll be
Oh
very
yeah,
very
100%.
very nice.
Right, man. All of them have just been like first or second sevens. All right, let's do one more.
Yeah.
See how bad it can get. Dovin's Veto, Ancient Tomb, a Snow-Covered Plains, a Felwar Stone, a Spellseeker, Miscast, and Whir of Invention. I think,
This hand probably would not be a keep for once. It does have like Ancient Tomb and this mana, but we're playing the mana and not really doing anything with it. We just have Spellseeker and
yeah,
like a counter spell there too. That's not where we want to be. If multiple people try to win on turn two, turn three, we're not going to be able to stop all of it. The Dovin's Veto will stop somebody. The Miscast will probably stop somebody, but then we have no cards in hand. Um, the Whir of Invention is good. We don't have a lot of blue sources for it. So we're
true.
probably not going
Yeah.
to be casting it anytime soon. So I would definitely probably pitch that away for a second seven.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really where we want to be. Usually you're just mulligan. You are going to mulligan really aggressively for rule of laws. I had a game last week actually where I mulliganed all the way down to 3 for land with mana crypt rule of law
Oh
going
man.
first.
Oh my god, that's brutal.
Yeah, it was, and I actually went on to win that game. It was beautiful. It was
Dang,
like a rule of law player's dream.
that's a
So
hell of a keep.
yeah,
All right, well, the second seven is spicy. We have Arcane Laboratory, Muddled the Mixture, Silence, Mystical Tutor, Psych Rift, Jeweled Lotus, and a Sea of Clouds.
ooh, I would be inclined to not keep that 7 either because we don't have a
Okay.
lot of additional mana because it sounds like we have one land and like a
Yeah.
Jewel Lotus,
Yep.
right? And we have no good way to play a rule of law. We have nothing to really complement the Reynar on turn one, and then we're kind of praying into just drawing another land, which probably isn't going to happen because we're not good Magic players. So um, being lucky is just not going to happen. So we'd probably pitch that down to 6, and I'd
Yeah.
comfortably pitch that down to 6. I don't mind going to 6. I think if you're mulliganing aggressively, you're probably playing the game correctly. So
Yeah. Agreed. All right, so going to 6, we have Arcane Signet, Delay, Sapphire Medallion, Archon of Emeria, Seagate Restoration, an Island, and a Mana Crypt.
yeah, so this hand is definitely
Yeah,
keepable. We have a turn one Archon, which is
that's
I
true.
believe, and turn one Archon just puts so many people off of fetches. It puts so many people off of good stuff. I'm not sure which card we would pitch out of there. What are our 7 again?
So we have Arcane Signet, Delay, Sapphire Medallion, Archon of Emeria, the Seagate Restoration, an Island, and a Mana Crypt. So, like, two-ish lands, basically 2 lands, a
Yeah,
Mana Crypt, the Arcane Signet, the Medallion, and a Delay.
yeah. I might actually just pitch the medallion there, and just
That makes
keep the
sense.
signet. Just mana crypt land is enough because we can play um, a rock. Alternatively, we could be greedy, pitch the delay if we really wanted to. It's probably not ideal.
Yeah.
There might be merit into pitching the Seagate as well. If you really wanted to just go mana cripple land into like double rock,
Mm-hmm.
that's potentially valuable. There's a lot of ways you could go in that hand depending on turn order and kind of the other decks you're seeing and kind of what you're expecting. Um,
And definitely, and what you would draw off the top.
yeah, so that's a very flexible 6. Um, Actually, if I heard that correctly, we don't have a white source, right? We don't have a white land.
You, no white land. Yeah,
Yeah,
just the.
so there is no turn one Archon, but it should be fine. A turn 2 Archon is perfectly reasonable. It's a turn 2 Archon with counterspell backup, so that's probably okay.
That's true.
We're not dying on turn 1, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, this has been, I think we'll call it there, but this has been a good time. Yeah, super, super stoked to talk about this deck because I just, playing against it, my mind was just constantly blown left and right with cracking treasures and getting spirits. Just
I
very
believe at one
silly.
point, yeah, I believe in one point during that game, I had like seven spirits in play, and it was just like, who let this happen, right? Like, it's not supposed to go down this way. Like, just chunking somebody for seven with your spirits every turn is just stupid.
Oh,
It's so
man.
fun.
Get wrecked, Adnos.
Yeah, one
um,
ones are scary in large numbers.
Especially when they fly. It's
Yeah,
just, oh, man. They're just
yeah.
swarming people.
A very little known fact about Reynar is the spirits do in fact fly. They're not silly Forbidden Orchard spirits. They
No.
definitely have wings.
All right. Well, is there anything that you would like to plug or anything as we're doing our outros?
Um, Not in particular. Like I said, I do Game Master stuff over on the cEDH subreddit Discord. I play a lot of games over there, so if you're looking for me there, you can find me there. Just at Whimsy. That's WHIMSEY. That is also my Moxfield. If you want to go find a blue-white haven of just Moxfield decks, that is the place to go. It's all blue-white decks. I believe we have a Heliod deck and a Gitrog deck, right? But the rest are blue-white decks, so
Nice.
that's where you should go if you want any of that stuff. Like I said, you can just message me on Discord anytime you want if you just want to talk about blue-white. That's pretty much all I do any given day. Um, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, very cool. And yes, of course, and as usual, you can follow me at Staff of Sage on Twitter and also on Moxfield and Tapped Out and Instagram for all of your silly and jank and stormy needs. Definitely, this deck is definitely the bane of Valky's existence. It is a struggle.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a bane of most of the meta. You're playing Rule of Law, you're playing Rest in Peace, and you're saying, hey, nobody gets to do anything.
yeah, you get one thing. Hope it's good.
Yeah.
But yes, this has been a blast. Thanks for coming on, and we'll see you all next time.